So, then I would like to welcome everyone to this hearing with the Committee on Development and the Commissioner-designate Jutta Urpilainen from Finland. We have 3 hours in front of us, and therefore we should jump right into it. First of all, a warm welcome to Jutta Urpilainen, the Commissioner-designate for International Partnership. It is great to finally start this hearing, and I know that the Commissioner-designate look forward to this as much as we do in the committee. Before we start, I would like just quickly to go through the formalities and the setting for this hearing. First, in line with the guidelines from the approval of the Commission, the Parliament evaluates the Commissioner-designate on the basis of their general competence, European commitment, and personal independence. It also assesses the knowledge of their prospective portfolio and their communication skills. Before the hearing, Mrs. Urpilainen had replied in writing to a preparatory questionnaire. The written answers have been distributed to members in all languages. We do note that the Committee on Legal Affairs has raised no objection to holding this hearing. The structure of this hearing is as follows. The Commissioner-designate is invited to make an opening oral statement of no longer than 15 minutes. She will then also have 5 minutes at the end of the meeting for closing statement. After the introduction, there will be time for 25 questions from members of Parliament. The debate will be held in accordance with the slots of 5 minutes each, with 1 minute for question and 2 minutes for answers from the candidate commissioner. In case of follow-up questions, the questions should not be longer than 1 minute, and with 1 minute also for the reply. The first round of 7 questions will be asked by representatives of political groups. The second round of 18 questions is based on the overall distribution of questions among the political groups, including also a representative from the non-attached members. I would like to remind members to strictly keep within their allocated speaking time. Today we have interpretation in 23 languages. All speakers can therefore use their own language, but please try to speak slowly, so we will have a good interpretation. The debate will be streamed live on Parliament's website, and it will also be possible to access a video recording of the hearing. Now, before giving the floor to the Commissioner-designate, I would like to say a few words and draw attention to a number of issues that are very important to this committee and on which we hope to see great collaboration from the Commission. First, one of the big reforms we have in front of us is the Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, the NDT. We do hope that it will bring increased efficiency and visibility to the European development policy, but also bring a substantial role for the European Parliament. Secondly, a roadmap for a comprehensive SDG implementation and a sustainable development with timelines, objectives, and concrete measures are of great importance. We are already 1/3 into the timeline on the implementation of the SDGs, and therefore we are eager to start working on the strategy. And not least, the post-Cotonou Agreement. In 2 resolutions, the European Parliament has insisted on the inclusion of a reinforced parliamentary dimension through a strengthened ACP-European Union Joint Parliamentary Assembly. We do look forward knowing how this fundamental demand from the Parliament is to be met in the context of the negotiations on the institutional setup of the future agreement. With that said, once again, a warm welcome to the Commissioner-designate. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Chair, honourable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honour and pleasure to be here with you as Commissioner-designate. In the following, I want to tell you who I am, what my goals are, and how I think we can achieve these goals together. I have to admit that I never imagined that I would be here on this bench when I campaigned for Finnish membership of the European Union at the age of 19. Neither when I participated in the board meetings of the European Social Democratic Youth, or when I co-founded and chaired a pro-European youth organization in Finland. Neither when I did my Erasmus exchange in Vienna and studied music with my fellow Europeans. Yes, yet it was during those times when I developed my strong European identity. Yet it was during those times that I developed my strong belief that European integration is good for Europe and good for the world. Yet, it is my European identity and my belief in integration that have guided me to this date, from my political life as a parliamentarian, Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, to my life as a mother and a work in a civil society, and my recent role as a special representative on peace mediation. Yet, it is my European identity and my belief in an ever closer union that have led me to this moment where, with your approval and consent, I hope to become a member of the College of European Commissioners. So, dear members of the European Parliament, you can believe me that I sit here in front of you inspired but also humble. Humble as a true believer in representative democracy. Dear European members of the European Parliament, major trends reshape our world and are impacting us all. Climate change, digitalization, migration and mobility, and inequalities, to name but a few. Having served in civil society organizations as well as in parliamentary and governmental work on foreign and development issues, I am committed to fighting inequality, supporting least developed countries, and promoting sustainable development. As Deputy Prime Minister, I volunteered to chair the National Commission for Sustainable Development. I found it extremely important to bring together different ministries and stakeholders. It is only together that we can really achieve important goals. Now the President-elect has chosen the same way to proceed. In the mission letters, she has stated that the College as a whole is responsible for the delivery of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I am proud of this holistic approach, and I intend to support fully this shared exercise in both internal and external policies. I am convinced that the Agenda 2030 is a golden opportunity for Europe. The European Commissioner for International Partnerships delivers on the implementation of SDGs in the world. My ambition is to eradicate poverty through international cooperation and development support. Our global responsibility is set out in the treaties and aligns with our values of human rights and human dignity. My ambition is to do it in a strategic and effective manner, ensuring it evolves with new global realities. Delivering on SDGs serves also our EU interests. We are talking about the sustainability of our planet. We are talking about human insecurity, driving people to conflicts and forced migration. Mr. Chairman and honourable members, before I entered politics, I worked as a teacher, so education is close to my heart. A sustainable, inclusive and equal world cannot be built without quality education for all. Education can help us cope with some of today's and tomorrow's challenges and megatrends. Think about the power of education to change behaviours on the environment or climate change, or the role of education in preparing future labour markets for the digital age. My commitment to the 20% target for human development in the new financing instrument is therefore clear. There are different kinds of needs. Fragile areas definitely need our attention. So does, for example, basic education, early childhood education, and education of young girls. And this brings me to a more personal point. It is my conviction that educating and empowering women and girls is the precondition for creating truly inclusive societies. I know what it means to break class ceilings. As the first female chairman of the Social Democratic Party of Finland, as my country's first ever female commissioner designate. So let me assure you today of my deep commitment to prioritising gender equality and mainstreaming it in all our policies and programmes. So I will focus on SDGs, fighting inequality and poverty eradication. But how? We need to design, based on priorities, modern country strategies and modern regional strategies that will contribute to delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. Such initiatives need the right funding. By finalising negotiations on the multi-annual financial framework, we can show partners that we are serious about improving the lives of people. And I intend to work with you and others to facilitate an agreement on the Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. In today's world, traditional methods of aid delivery are not enough. They are not enough to meet the SDGs. They are not enough to forge the kind of partnerships that are fit for the new global realities. As the European Commissioner, I will commit to using our assistance also for leveraging more domestic revenue and more private sector capital. 21st century development policy has to harness all instruments to generate more investments, jobs, better regulation and improved governance. This includes using the fullest of potential of our external investment plan. I see the modernised title, International Partnerships, as a big opportunity. It reflects our focus on multilateralism and cooperation as equal partners. The EU working on its own cannot save the planet and prepare for the future. It will have to be done together by the EU and our partners working hand in hand. The EU will be the guardian of multilateralism and the rules-based order. The combined assistance capacity of the EU and its member states needs to be used coherently to promote our values and objectives, both on the ground in partner countries, but also in international financial institutions. Back in 2015, when the global community moved from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, it abandoned the formula of North-South, donor-recipient, developed-developing. Instead, the global community set out a universal, ambitious, and far-reaching blueprint agreed by all and for all. As a European Commissioner, I would make sure that the EU is a reliable and solid ally for partner countries in their SDG journeys. Strong international partnerships with Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Asia, and the Pacific can help us to take on many of today's major generational issues. Also, such comprehensive partnerships will help us to unlock opportunities and to address challenges linked to migration management together. If confirmed as Commissioner, it is my intention to build on the EU-Africa Alliance for Sustainable Investment and Jobs towards a comprehensive European strategy for Africa. In this effort, I will work alongside the High Representative and Vice President and other fellow commissioners. The partnership with our neighbouring continent has deepened economically for the benefit of both African and European citizens, with the private sector involved in creating jobs and providing new skills. I want to continue on this path, deepening our mutual interests and our capacity to reap opportunities jointly. We must turn our backs on the old narrative of Africa as a continent of instability and poverty. Instead, we have to welcome with open arms Africa as a young continent of hope and prosperity. I will also make it my priority to conclude negotiations on the post-Cotonou agreement. We need to complete a modern, strategic and influential alliance between the EU and the African, Caribbean and Pacific states on the international stage, one that serves our common interests and all our people. And let me assure you today that I will not waver in my commitment to the appropriate parliamentary dimension of this future partnership. Dear colleagues, the European Union draws its strength from all its institutions. So I want to emphasize my commitment to working with other institutions towards the same objective. We will cement the EU as world leader in international cooperation and development support. As a parliamentarian, I truly believe in representative democracy, and I will do my utmost to make the special relationship between the Commission and the European Parliament ever stronger and deeper. I am here to listen to you. I value your experience, knowledge, and views. I will work closely with the High Representative Vice President in making Europe as an influential global player. In the spirit of a geopolitical commission, as announced by the President-elect, I also intend cooperating closely with other commissioners whose policy areas affect EU external action. And I will continue driving work with Member States on joint analysis, joint programming and joint implementation, as well as on achieving the official development assistance target of 0.7% of gross national income. The civil society organizations are perhaps our greatest allies and must be at the heart of the European Union's work on international cooperation and development. It is in everyone's interest to involve them as much as possible in policy making and the design and implementation of our programs. Honourable Chair, dear colleagues, we need politics for our planet, for humankind. European citizens are expecting us to act. The youth, they want more. Our children deserve that we do our best. I want to build trust together with you. Trust that our partners see a strong EU delivering SDGs and fighting poverty. Trust that our citizens understand the reasoning and results of our development and cooperation work. Trust between people and institutions, because a more equal world is achieved only together. So now it is time for me to listen to you and try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that opening statement, Commissioner Designate. We will now start the first round with 7 questions from the political groups, and I will now like to give the floor to Jörg Hölven from EPP.
Many thanks, Mr. Chairman. Many thanks, Madam Commissioner Designate, and many thanks for your introduction. I will take my question in my mother tongue, Hungarian. Please take your headset. Thank you. Tisztelt biztos jelölt asszony.
Commissioner Designate, the 2015 migration crisis has showed us that in the Near East and in Asia, the economic and political situation, which is very unstable, can threaten the security of our continent. Weak governments mean that citizens are losing their rights. This issue is linked to migration. We need to act in countries of origin. That's where we need to focus our aid and not to import the problem into the European Union. People need to be able to exercise their rights in their home countries rather than risk their lives in long migrations. The European development policy should operate on that basis, so we need to make some radical changes. I myself and my group here in the Parliament, the EPP, would like to ask the following question. What does this right to stay, what does that term mean? Right to stay in a country of origin. Does that mean that we need to do everything possible so that this right is guaranteed for everyone?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member of the European Parliament, Holvenu. I want to take this opportunity to thank you and all the coordinates for the meeting I had a few weeks ago. I think it was a very great honor to me to have a meeting with all the political parties in the Parliament. You ask about connection between developing policy and migration. For me, I think it's a question of root causes. When I worked as a special representative on peace mediation, I traveled a lot in Africa. And I have to tell you that it was a very heartbreaking moment to meet young people who have lost their hope for future. But I understand them. If they don't have access to education, if they don't have access to work, it's very hard to believe in the future. So from that perspective, I would say that through the developing cooperation, we try to improve conditions in the country of origins and our partner countries. We can do it through the education, we can do it through the investments, job creations, and so on. And of course, the whole framework for this cooperation is Sustainable Development Goals, as I mentioned in my previous speech.
Follow-up?
Many thanks. Köszönöm az ön által elmondottakat.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. What we need in Africa, and you said it very clearly and very correctly, that we need to go and look at the situation in country. That's why I'd like to ask, prior to taking a decision in Africa, in Asia, in other areas, do you listen to civil society and political representatives in those countries? The European Commission, in its development toolbox, should have some more specific policies, above all the NDICI, the Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. How will this NDICI work to help you achieve your aims in the area of development?
I'm definitely ready to have a dialogue with you, with all the political parties and parliamentary groups and all other stakeholders, including civil society. In a way that has been a guidance in my political life, to have a dialogue, even if we always don't agree on everything. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that the only way to have sustainable migration policy in the future is to try to address the root causes. We need to improve the living conditions in the country of origin, but also our other partner countries. That's the only way to give a hope for the people in those societies. And I'm ready to do at most in my work as a member of the European Commission.
Now we give the floor to Udo Bullman, SND.
Welcome, Commissioner Designate, also on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats in this House. You rightly say the Sustainable Development Goals are a golden opportunity for all of us. We could call it also perhaps our very last chance. Achieving the fight against extreme poverty, meeting the challenges of today like climate change and rising inequalities, also stability, I may add. What can we do to get back on track? How can we step up our efforts? How can we get a detailed roadmap, which we lack at the very moment in Europe as well as on the international scale? And how can we better monitor and benchmark the processes ahead with binding targets? You have seen the 3 scenarios of the outgoing Commission. We are clearly in favor of the first scenario because this is the only one giving us hope for achieving the goals. So we are keen getting to know what your plans could be.
Commissioner Designate.
Thank you for this very important question. Fighting inequality has always been my target. Also when I was the finance minister, I found it very important to fight against inequalities. In a way, I feel that SDGs and Agenda 2030 is my compass. That should be the compass for everybody. That should be the compass for the whole Commission as well. because I don't see that we are able to reach or achieve those sustainable development goals only through the developing policy. We need to have a comprehensive strategy for that. And that's why I was so delighted, so happy that the President-elect has actually mentioned in many mission letters that the whole college will be responsible for the implementation of SDGs. One tool she has also mentioned is that maybe in the future we could use, and I personally support that idea, European semester in the implementation of SDGs. So that's the one part of the tools we are having. But as I mentioned also in my speech, I personally see that we need to support our partner countries to have their own national and regional strategies for the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal, because this project is it's a common project. It's not only a project for European Union, but it's a project for the whole global society.
Follow up.
Commissioner-designate, in your introductory remarks that we should not talk about North and South again, but rather develop the idea that we are all in developing countries and we have to do our homework. You mentioned the semester. What does it mean for your portfolio? Because I don't think that this is a peripheral portfolio. I would say this is a key portfolio if we would like to have the countries in our partner areas and ourselves on equal footing. So what could we do from your perspective also to reorganize domestic European politics like agriculture, food production, like trade, through the lenses of those partners which we need dearly to achieve our joint roadmap?
Commissioner-designate.
About my title, partnerships, I personally see that my title, international partnerships, it's very wise title, because as you mentioned yourself, it sends a message to the partner countries that we don't want to have this kind of donor-recipient relationship. We want to have more equal partnerships, because, as you said yourself, also in the European Union, there is a lot to do to be able to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, the European Union and Commission, together with the Parliament and Council, is not able to do it alone, because we need to have member states to be part of that process. And as I said earlier, I think European semester could be one great new tool to try to implement the SDGs.
Give the floor now to Charles Goerens, Renew.
Oui, merci, monsieur. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Good morning, future Commissioner. I was delighted to hear your introductory remarks. When it comes to development within the European Union, you will be responsible for the mission of the most important global actor when it comes to international development. So you'll be responsible for future partnerships between the European Union and developing countries. There'll be partnerships, there'll be gender equality, there'll be and appropriations and so on will be part of the future of international development. And that has been the part of it over the last decades. In your mission letter, the future President of the European Commission says that she expects that you will be concluding full partnership agreements using all instruments and tools available. And that's all very well. And she says then that you should also adapt EU aid to align it to matters of migration management. But that's where things get a bit complicated. How do you interpret that? Can you exclude a policy which means that our partnerships will in future be subject to issues pertaining to migration. Can you exclude strict conditionality underpinned by migration rules when it comes to development cooperation policy?
As I already answered, I think it was the first question, I see that there is a connection between developing policy and migration. And it becomes through the root causes. Because we know that in many cases, for instance, the conflict drives people away from their home countries. They need to go somewhere else to be saved and stay alive. So my personal view is that we need to continue developing cooperation between those countries, countries of origin, but of course other countries as well. We all know that the European Union is the biggest donor in the world, so of course we are not only cooperating with those countries from which we get migrants to Europe. But at the same time, because I'm the honest person, so I want to be honest, I think it's not possible to think that with conditionality we can stop migration. That's not possible. Because if we only look at the financial flows to the developing countries, we can see that, the developing aid and developing cooperation is only, just a part of the financial flows. So from that perspective, I would say that the Commission, the European Union, should have one migration policy. And of course, development cooperation is a part of that, but it can't be the only tool in the package.
Follow up?
Oui, merci.
Thank you. So, if I've understood well, it's more about partnerships than dictating rules. And in order to avoid a scenario that I referred to, we are going to have to galvanize and mobilize more funding and resources for development policy. For generations now, we've been asking for the 0.7% of GNI from the member states. And for the time being, only 4 member states have honored that commitment in terms of aid. You are a former Minister of Finances yourself. So what is the difficulty here? Should we not, looking at what's happening in the context of the European semester, in the budgetary context, should we not impose on member states that are not honouring their commitments, that they should then report back and explain why to the European Parliament?
Commissioner designate.
I would say that it's a question of political will, because it's a question of political decisions, and not only in the European Union, but also in the member states. Because as a former finance minister, I know that it's the finance minister who proposes a budget for the national parliament. So from that perspective and from my experience, I would say that I personally see that we should integrate finance ministers and heads of states to be part of this 0.7 target discussion. And I'm ready to try to do that. Of course, I can only take my own part, but I think this could be a one tool, because if it's the only discussion among developing ministers or ministers for developing cooperation, I think it's not enough. So maybe this is something we could develop together in the future, that how are we able to involve finance ministers and heads of states to be part of discussion, and that in that way put more, in a way, pressure to the member states as well.
Michel Rivasi, Greens.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Commissioner Designate, to this hearing, to this committee. I'm going to ask you questions about environmental crimes, because it's all very well to say we want to achieve the SDGs by 2030, but if we can't respond to these environmental crimes, I'm not sure how we're going to achieve the SDGs. In addition, these crimes are among the most profitable transnational crimes. It's the 4th largest area after drugs, weapons and human trafficking. And I have a simple question for you. What's your strategy to effectively fight environmental criminality in developing countries, and particularly when it comes to illegal logging, illegal fishing, illegal trafficking in dangerous waste and pollution to levels that people can no longer feed themselves? And would you be ready to extend the remit of the ICC so that it covers environmental crimes?
Designate.
Thank you for this very important question, because I fully think that we all share the importance of a clean environment. What is the best way to take care of environment and fight against climate change or different kind of aspects of that? I would say that the best tool for that is a Green Deal, the initiative made by the President-elect. And maybe in the public debate and also within the Commission and within the European Parliament as well, I don't know, I suppose, we have concentrated quite a lot the internal aspects of the Green Deal. But my personal view is that Green Deal should also have external dimension. That is the tool to try to improve also environmental question in our partner countries. I know that European Union is using over 20% of its development funding for climate environment already, but I fully agree with you that we need to do more. That's not enough. And what we need to do, for instance, I think we need to support transition to low emission and circular economies also in our partner countries. And of course, that includes also those aspects you mentioned earlier. So I think that actually the Green Deal could be a great opportunity to put climate and environmental questions in the front, also in our developing cooperation together with our partner countries.
Follow up?
Yes, well, Green Deal. It's a lovely term, but I think we need sanctions, we need monitoring. Let me give you a tangible example. I looked at the special UN report on the right to food, and there it says that the use of pesticides in developing countries is responsible for over 200,000 deaths a year. So what can you do, Commissioner Designate, about that? Because in Europe, as you know, pesticides are banned because they're toxic, but they're being exported to developing countries. They don't have the tools available to check people's health, etc. So what can you do about that? We need not to be poisoning these people who live in those countries where the appropriate controls to protect them aren't in place.
Commissioner Designate.
I fully agree with you that we need to have sanctions and we need to have regulations. That's what we also need. But what comes to the agriculture, I would say that agriculture is central because, millions get their income from farming, especially in the developing countries, we know that. But it is also most affected by the climate change and also an emitter of greenhouse gases. So from my perspective, I see that we need a transformation of global food systems to provide healthy food to 10 billion people by the year 2050. Of course, food safety is important of all of us. I mean, for Europeans, but for all of us. So what we can do, we can support African companies and African authorities comply with EU norms and regulations. And I personally, I'm ready to cooperate, for instance, with research institutions and other stakeholders relating or regarding this matter.
Now I give the floor to Bernard Simniok, ID.
Ja, nach unserem persönlichen Gespräch bin ich also zu der Überzeugung gelangt, dass Sie...
Well, I see that you're very prepared for your mandate. But I think it would be better if you gave clear questions, clear answers. For a few years, there are constant accusations that assistance money for Palestinians, which also comes out of EU project money, is being used to support terrorism. And that basically continues to inflame the conflict. I think there's a tangible example. The Court of Auditors in 2012 wrote a report on the use of EU funds and criticised some funds because it was being used for the inappropriate purposes. I said the Commission ignored that report and things have just continued to take place as they always did. How are you going to deal with that issue under your mandate? Are you going to look into the accusations and are you going to prevent the misuse of EU funding? Because until this point, this issue and other issues have been ignored. So please tell us clear measures that you will take to solve this problem.
Commissioner designate.
I believe in transparency. I think always when we are using taxpayers' money, we need to be very open and very transparent, and we also need to be able to show our achievements. So why we are using taxpayers' money and what do we get, or what do we achieve with those projects we are using taxpayers' money. And this is I think this is a question of legitimacy for me. If we want to strengthen the legitimacy of the European Union, we need to be able to show the people, show the citizens that what are the achievements, what are the results of our developing cooperation projects and programs. So from that perspective, I am very committed to improve our transparency. I know that it's very good already in the EU projects, but I'm willing to do even better and more in the future. This concrete project you mentioned in your question, I need to study it more closely because unfortunately I don't have all those facts. I have been studying hard during 2 weeks, but I don't still know everything, but I will definitely come back to you with this specific project.
Follow up?
Ja, danke.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's great that you're offering to discuss this issue again. But I wanted to perhaps extend my initial question and add a further question. Apparently, all these billions of development assistance money that have been pumped into the Palestinian Authority, well, all of that money hasn't really had any positive effects so far. Quite the opposite. It seems to be misused. There are indicators that would suggest that. Isn't it time to think about alternative development models and come up with a new development policy so that we can stop Palestinians being dependent on international money? And I think that would help us to move towards a peace process rather than cementing the current situation. Do you have any plans to do that during your coming period in office?
Commissioner designate.
I think we all share the view to achieve peace in the Middle East. I think that's something we all would like to have. One aspect I would like to raise is how to involve more women and youth into the peace processes. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I worked also as a special representative of peace mediation. And in that role, I was trying to look for initiatives how to get young people and women more into the peace processes. Because I see that if we give there to more strong and more strong role, so it might also help us to achieve better results. So this is one example how to build peace in our very unstable world.
And I'll give the floor to Beata Kempa, ECR.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your words, for what you've said. Hopefully this will mean new values, so partnership and not dictating our rules. This is very important from the point of view of international cooperation, especially out there where things are very bad. Dear Madam, I would have a question because, yes, indeed, the European Union is the biggest donor in the world. However, there is also the question of how efficient it is. We talked before, thank you for the meeting, we exchanged our experiences, we talked about the places, destinations that we both visited, very difficult places from which most migrants come. And our development policy is done by way of indirect management. So European Commission is giving the task to other entities, and financial institutions, executing agencies are dealing with these, and they come from the biggest member states. And my question is as follows. Would you like to use the experience of smaller member states where as part of the civil society and non-governmental organizations are not able to participate as part of large agencies? However, they have a lot of experience which could be used. Thank you.
Commissioner designate.
I'm definitely willing to learn more. I'm definitely willing to cooperate with the member states. I see that that's necessary if we want to really achieve sustainable development goals. We need to work together. As I mentioned earlier, it isn't enough that the European Union and its all institutions are doing the work, but we need to involve also the member states to be part of that approach. And of course, we need partnerships, and that will be a dialogue, and partnerships will be the way I work if I be nominated as a commissioner. So from my personal experience, I know that civil society and NGOs, they are doing excellent work in many very difficult and fragile countries and areas. So of course I'm willing to cooperate with them and other stakeholders as well, and also learn more from the experience of our small and big member states.
Follow up.
Tak, bardzo dziękuję za tą.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your reply. I would like to ask as a follow-up, do you intend to come up with a report on the efficiency of the actions and the efficiency of means, so the means and how these funds are used, and how it is linked to the migration? And would you also specify in this report the areas which we haven't reached? And we have a lot of such areas, destinations from where a lot of migrants come from. So do you intend to do this?
I think follow-up is always necessary and it's always important. regarding conflict areas and fragile areas, I have already met my colleague for crisis management, and we had a very good discussion. And what we try to do, we try to work very closely together, because we see that the project called Nexus, which started, I think it was 1.5 years ago, it has provided good results, but we still have plenty of things to do. So I think this is one area, you know, we could make achievements together, and I think you personally have also experience on that field, and I'm very happy to use your experience in the future if you just allowed me to do so.
Now I give the floor to Miguel Urban Crespo. Miguel.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the Commissioner-designate. I would like to continue the questions on migration, but looking at it from a slightly different approach. I think the major failure of the previous Commission was the way they managed the misnamed migration crisis. It was a crisis of the right. Migration policy was set out to create Fortress Europe based on the externalization of our borders, which used development cooperation and conditionalities as one of its primary tools. And we think it was, in fact, one of the most dangerous instruments. So I'd like to ask a question about this. During your mandate, will you maintain the policy of conditioning development aid to migration conditionality, specifically, for example, in Niger? That's a very interesting example. And will you study the impact of this policy on human rights? Thank you.
Commissioner-designate.
For me, European Union is a community of values. So I think in everything we do, within the European Union, but also outside the European Union, we need to respect rule of law and human rights. That's very, very clear to me, and of course I'm very committed to that approach as a commissioner designated. As I mentioned earlier, I don't really believe that only conditionality could solve the migration crisis, or generally migration. Because, you know, if you take, for example, Niger or some other African countries, developing aid is the only little part of the financial flow to that country. So I don't see that, you know, by ending that financial flow, we could, you know, try to influence that country. So from that perspective, as I said earlier, I think Commission should have a one migration policy, and of course the whole college is representing that policy, and developing cooperation and developing aid. It's one part of that package, but it can't be the only tool. So for me that is very, very clear.
Follow-up.
Una comunidad.
Una community based on values, which has turned the Mediterranean into a mass grave, or the Sahel into a mass grave, because of our policies. Niger receives over $1 billion in development cooperation from the EU, and it's the poorest country in Africa. Yes, there's a direct relation to these policies because of the conditionality. There's a 10% of the budget of the new instrument for neighbourhood development and international cooperation, which is being debated now in this House. 10% is destined to migration control. Do you think that controlling or conditioning and development on migration, this is only going to worsen the situation, and it's a violation of human rights in countries of origin and countries in transit? Will you stop doing this? Thank you.
Commissioner-designate.
my opinion is that EU should always save people's lives. That's our mission. And that's what we try to do with the developing cooperation, because we know that there is over 700 million people living in extreme poverty. So that's why we do the developing cooperation. We do it for people. We do it for people, not for governments, not for societies, not for private sector. We do it for people. That's my commitment. And I definitely want to do everything I can to increase financial resources for the least developed countries in the world. We have committed ourselves to target of 0.15, 0.2, but unfortunately we haven't achieved that. And that's something we need to work together in the future.
Thank you. That was the first round. Now I open up for 18 more questions from members, and I will now give the floor to Rasa Junkeviciene, EPP.
Thank you. I found very positive your intentions to work together with the European Parliament, with us. So I would like to address to you, dear Jutta. Definition Geopolitical Commission has to ensure that the EU adapts to a world of great powers. For that, it needs strategic tools to deliver on the EU priorities abroad. Your mandate is far-reaching, from the partnerships on migration to active support to the oppressed civil societies across the globe and in the neighborhood, Belarus, Russia. What measures will you undertake to ensure that neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument, NDICI, helps to strengthen the fundamental values of democracy, the rule of law, good governance, as well as nuclear safety standards in the EU neighborhood and worldwide? Will you support European Parliament's position to ensure that NDICI instrument shall have teeth and provide you the possibility to suspend aid in case our partners violate all these mentioned principles? Thank you.
Commissioner designate.
Thank you for this question, and definitely you can call me Jutta. That's fine for me. As I said earlier in this hearing, I personally see that we should respect the values, human rights and rule of law in everything we do, within the European Union, but also outside the European Union. And for me, as a Commissioner designate for international partnership, it will be my guidance to improve rule of law and human rights through the developing cooperation. What comes to the NDICI, I have been studying that quite a lot during the past 2 weeks, and for me, I got the feeling that it makes sense to have this kind of new instrument, because now we have several different kind of financial instruments, but through the NDICI we emerge those different kind of instruments to be one financial instrument. And because European Development Fund will be part of the budget, so it of course gives more power to the European Parliament in the future also. So I think as a parliamentarian I see that's also very, very positive side. But I personally see that, and also from my experience as finance minister, with one tool, with one financial instrument, we are able to be more coherent, we can be more efficient, and of course it will be also maybe easier to understand our work from the stakeholders' perspective. So I'm very committed to take that instrument in our work, to our work.
Follow up?
As you may be aware, the Parliament is ready to start interinstitutional negotiations on NDICI. However, the Council has adopted only a partial negotiation mandate. It is very likely that the Council will take last night's decision regarding two major aspects of that instrument, budgetization of the European Development Fund and inclusion of the European Neighbourhood Instrument. What is your opinion on the future of the proposed regulation if the Council adopts the position not to include these two instruments in the regulation? How you will ensure that restructuring of the existing development instruments makes everybody happy, the Parliament, the Council, and the partners?
Commissioner designate.
As I said earlier, my personal view is that I think it's good to merge different financial instruments together. And also that relates to or regarding European Development Fund. I think it's also wise to have part of the budget, so it gives more power to you as a parliamentarians. I think I'm so experienced politician that I don't want to speculate. So now when we are in the middle of negotiations, I think it's wiser not to start to speculate what we do if. So, of course, if I be nominated as a commissioner, I do my best to reach a common understanding with all the institutions. But we need to first get MFF ready and negotiate it because, of course, NDICI will be part of MFF.
Now I give the floor to Mark Tarabella, S&D.
Madam Commissioner Designate, Ms. Urpilainen, we talked about policy coherence for development, and that's a fundamental requirement to guarantee that EU political action takes into account the impact that it has in developing countries. If you look at Article 208 of the treaty, that's an essential principle to be able to achieve the objectives of sustainable development. We cannot eliminate poverty, hunger, or guarantee health and well-being if we're not consistent in trade, agriculture, and environmental and social policies. So policy coherence for development, for sustainable development, is an absolute sine qua non to be able to achieve the sustainable development goals. But we don't have follow-up evaluation tools that are fit for purpose when it comes to securing this or ensuring this. So as Commissioner, your role will be vital when it comes to mainstreaming development in all policy areas. So how are you going to evaluate policy coherence for development in your role as Commissioner? How are you going to envisage cooperation with other portfolios and other commissioners to make sure that we are being consistent and ensuring policy coherence for development? Thank you.
Thank you. I found this question very important. And of course, it relates to the SDGs and Agenda 2030. As I said earlier today, I take sustainable development goals as a compass for me. So it should be the framework for the whole development cooperation. But you are right, definitely, because within the European Union, the left hand needs to know what right hand is doing. So it's not enough if we only concentrate on developing cooperation. If we really want to achieve sustainable development goals in our partner countries, we need to have trade, we need to have agriculture part of that approach. That's necessary. So, of course, I see that cooperation with my colleagues in the college, our trade commissioner, commissioner for agriculture, for instance, are very important to have this policy coherence within the work of the Commission. One tool for that could be also those national and regional strategies, which we try to support our partners to prepare. So I think that through those we are also able to support them to have this comprehensive approach to achieve sustainable development goals.
Follow-up?
Yes, recent evaluations concluded that the EU delegations in partner countries are not playing a big enough role in the evaluation and the promotion of policy coherence for development. So, how are you going to work with the High Representative to make sure that coherence for development is going to be at the top of the agenda for the work being done by the EEAS, the External Action Service?
Commissioner designate.
I have already met High Representative Vice President Borrell a couple of times, and we had very, very good discussions. And I'm sure we are able to, and we are willing to work together, because I see that, of course, development cooperation needs to be part of the external relations. So my personal view is that we as a European Union, we should have first a common analysis, also geopolitical analysis, what is happening in the world. Then we should have a common strategy, which is based on the strategy, the analysis. And then, of course, we implement that strategy through the programming. So I'm very committed to work together with the High Representative, and I'm sure we are going to have a very good cooperation.
And now I would like to give the floor to Chrysola Sakharopoulou, Renew.
Bonjour, Madame.
Good morning, Ms. Urpilainen. Hello, just behind you.
Je suis très content.
I'm very pleased because I think it's the first time we're going to have a female commissioner for development, unless I'm mistaken. As you said, you can see in your answers, you have above all focused on gender equality and above all education for girls and women's empowerment and the fight against violence against women. You know clearly how difficult to access, or the absence of sexual reproductive health is well known, access to contraception, female genital mutilation. These are all major violations of women's rights, but they also threaten school, health, and it exposes women and girls to general violence and undermines their future prospects. I wanted to ask you, how specifically will you commit to fighting this? What specific policy measures will be used to speak with partner countries, and how will you work with civil society, which is very committed to these issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your important question. Sexual and reproductive health will be a central focus of our work for gender equality. That's very clear for me. And maybe I take this opportunity to thank current Commissioner Mimica for his work relating to gender equality. The Spotlight initiative, I think it's important initiative, and I'm very committed to continue that work in the future. I also see that in this field, relating gender equality and gender parity, we need strong partnerships around the world. We need, of course, cooperate with international organizations, civil society, national governments, and so on. Because only through the cooperation we are able to achieve results. What is, of course, important to all of us, for Europeans, but also our fellow citizens around the world, is to access the health services. So this is, of course, something I would like to improve and strengthen when I'm working as a commissioner, because I think that, in a way, to be able to access health services is a basic right for all of us, and it should be a basic right also in our partner countries.
Follow up.
In your response, you have also mentioned a possible gender action plan 3. So a question would be as follows. If you don't come up with a third gender action plan, what other instrument would you suggest or propose to ensure continuity in this area, given that gender equality is a priority, as you say? Thank you.
Commissioner designate.
I can promise you in the front of the Parliament that we are going to make a gender action plan number 3. This is something I will propose, and I'm very committed to prepare. So I think that is one tool for us to provide and promote gender equality.
Now I'd like to give the floor to Lukas Mandel, EPP.
Yeah, congratulations, Madame Urpilainen, for being nominated for the new European Commission, and also a great thank you for providing us with your strong commitment with parliamentarism you showed today, and also for your commitment with the idea that it's all about the people and to support people in their own lives. And that's why I think this is not a technical hearing. It's a hearing with regard to your policy priorities. And so I really ask, are you aware of the fact that it's all about the economy? Because opportunities for people are about the economy. And with economic strength, people can achieve a lot if they receive proper training, especially vocational training. Education, it's what it's all about, and rule of law, education and rule of law. So what exact measures are you intending to take to strengthen education opportunities in developing countries, because that's something EU should provide the world with?
Commissioner designate.
Thank you. As I mentioned in my speech, I worked as teacher before I became politician. So, of course, in my work, I was able to see personally how education can change lives. And I see that definitely we should commit ourselves, and I'm ready to commit myself to use through NDICI this 20% our financing to human development. This is important for me. What concerns me is the quality of education, because it's not only a question of access to education, but it's also the question of quality of education. We just got some time ago a report made by the World Bank, and the message was that unfortunately quite many people, even if they have participated to education, they are not able to read, they are not able to count. So I think I would put more focus, I would put more money for finances, for resources, but also I would put more focus on quality. So quality of education. I think that is very important. And of course, for me, it's very clear that education is a key for poverty reduction and will be, therefore, my priority.
Follow-up?
Please. Thank you so much for your response. May I go deeper into the gender balance question, since it's maybe also a cultural question whether girls receive as much opportunities as boys when they are children, or even adults when it comes to questions of education. So in what fields do you think, and with what other commissioners you will cooperate in order to fulfill, I would say, EU's obligation also to influence other parts of the world with what we call European values, which is, of course, same rights for men and women, especially in the field of education and for future opportunities. And thank you again for focusing on quality, since quality needs great teachers, and that's obviously something you know, since you're yourself a teacher.
Commissioner designate.
Of course, Commissioner for Gender Equality she plays an important role. But also, I would say that the gender approach should be approach of the whole Commission, the whole college. I want to share you one experience that I had some time ago when I visited a refugee camp in Gambella in Ethiopia. And that experience was very strong for me because in that camp there are over 90,000 people living in that camp. But what was very sad for me is that only half of those children living in that camp were able to access school. So from that perspective, I see that, and actually I have already talked with my fellow commissioner for crisis management, that we also need to improve access for education for women and girls, and generally in refugee camps, because I think it's important that also those people living in those camps are able to access school. That's the one example, of course. We could have many more examples.
Pier Francesco Maggiorino, SND.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Designate. I was very pleased to hear many of the things that you said, but I do want to focus on one issue. During recent years, we've seen a shift of resources when it comes to development cooperation, and we've moved towards interventions that block and control borders without guarantees for the full respect of human rights and without the Parliament having any effective control. And one of the main tools in this area was trust funds. This is a very flexible structure behind which, I believe, we see ambiguity in the use of funds. For example, in 2018, the Libyan Coast Guard was receiving funding, and they don't really have anything to do with cooperation and development policy. So I wanted to ask what you thought about this issue, i.e. what trust funds are destined for and how things could change potentially.
Commissioner Designate.
Sorry. I think for me it's a question of also supporting the country of transit, because we know that is it like 85% of the migrations are living in the developing countries. So I think through the developing cooperation we can also support those countries, so countries of origin but also countries of transit. I know that the Africa Trust Fund is something which divides a bit members of the European Parliament. I personally see, as I said earlier already today, that transparency is a very important value for me, and also I understand that in the future, of course, if we are thinking about what will be the future of the Africa Trust Fund or generally different kind of trust funds, I think that Parliament should have an important role. So we will see what will happen in the future. I don't know exactly what are the plans, but I'm sure that your role as a parliamentarians is needed to be stronger than it has been today.
Follow up?
Quindi volevo insistere su questo.
Well, let me insist on that point, because I just want to understand whether we agree on the need to involving the Parliament when it comes to directly controlling these funds, so that we can ensure that there's coherence among the trust funds. Would you say that that funding instruments such as the money that went to the Libyan Coast Guard is incompatible with the trust funds, because obviously that's not supporting a transit country a crucial issue which you have recalled. At the moment, these are just tools to block our borders and externalize any problems.
Policy coherence is important. And as I said earlier today, we need to improve policy coherence in everything we do. And what comes to the role of the Parliament, I have been member of the Finnish Parliament over 16 years. I really respect the work you are doing. You are elected by the people. I am nominated by you, if you allow me to do so. But you are elected by the people. You are representing people. So from that perspective, in everything I do, I give value for the parliamentary work, and I'm ready to look for different kind of initiatives, how to strengthen the role of the European Parliament.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Pirette Herzberger-Fofana, Greens.
Behind you. Bonjour, Madame la... Behind you.
Good morning, Commissioner Designate. The mission letter from the President-elect says that for trade, there should be priority given to the EU partnerships with Africa. And the long-term goal is to establish a free trade zone between the two continents. Exports of dairy products at low price to West Africa shows that there is a serious risk of the liberalization of agricultural products, which often destroy local production of dairy products. And this particularly affects women who are at the heart of this local production chain. Madam Commissioner Designate, are you in favour of the possibility that African states should be able to take measures to protect family-run small holdings and sustainable agriculture against the risks generated by low-price European exports to Africa? These measures could also include restrictions on quantities on European exports, and also give preference to local product and local markets, or indeed introduce duties and rights which are variable on agricultural products. Thank you very much indeed.
Commissioner Designate.
Also, women economic empowerment is key priority for me. I think all of us who has visited in, for instance, in Africa can see that, you know, it's full of small family-run farms and agriculture. So we know that it's, of course, a very important matter for Africa. I'm ready to take new measures. So my question to your answer is yes, I am. And I think that one possibility for that is this comprehensive strategy for Africa, which is mentioned in my mission letter. So I think that in that comprehensive strategy for Africa, we need to have agriculture involved, we need to have trade involved, we need to have environmental aspects involved. So I think that strategy gives us a new opportunity also to support agriculture in Africa. So I think that's the one new tool we are able to use.
Follow-up?
Oui. Dans quelle mesure?
So, in what way will the European Union act to ensure that agricultural investments on the part of Europe in the context of public-private partnerships in particular are not going to jeopardize the rights, the land use rights for native people, particularly in a context where companies are pushing governments to loosen the rules to their advantage?
Commissioner Designate.
I think you mentioned a very important word when you said private sector. And I think we haven't talked about it very much today yet. Because if we want to achieve sustainable development goals by the year 2030, We need to get private sector involved. That's necessary. Otherwise, we won't achieve sustainable development goals. And of course, what has already been done through this alliance initiative made by President Juncker, I think results have been quite good. But in the coming years, we need to get more investments to Africa, and of course, a private sector has to be part of that approach. I just give you one example. In sub-Saharan Africa, we need to create 18 million new jobs every year to be able to employ those young people coming to the labor market. 18 million new jobs every year. So we all understand that even if we are able to increase the public finances to developing cooperation, we are not surviving. So we need to have private sector involved, but of course we also need to have regulations and rules.
Thank you. I would just like to inform the members and the Commissioner designate that we have now done more than half of the questions. I think we're doing quite well so far, but stay on your toes. We have 12 more questions coming up. The next question goes to Dominic Bild, ID.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Your strategy for Africa hides a reality. That is, the EU is weakened in the post-Cotonou agreements compared with the year 2000. There's new actors, China, Russia, and the weight of the EU in the world economy has decreased, above all with Brexit. We need to be aware of the limits of our model. The withdrawal of the UK also removes a major actor for Africa in diplomatic, political and military terms. The UK provided 15% of the European development budget between 2014 and 2016, and was in 2018 was one of the very few member states who met 0.7% of GNI for official assistance. Yes, Germany has come forward with a Marshall Plan for Africa, but the experience of the G5 Sahel teaches us that fund commitments are not always met. My question is simple. Have you understood all of the possible implications of Brexit on the EU-Africa relationship, and how do you expect to deal with them?
I would say that what comes to the Brexit, it's of course a question of United Kingdom's people and politicians. But of course, the UK has been a very important donor, and especially UK's NGOs, they do a very important role of work in the field. So from that perspective, I hope that in any case, UK will be a good partner for us regarding developing cooperation. But as we know, there are plenty of questions regarding Brexit, so I think that it's not my duty and my obligation today to speculate different kind of outcomes. But I see that the work UK is doing regarding developing cooperation, I see it very valuable, and I really hope that we can continue our cooperation in any case.
Thank you. I just want to say one technical thing from the interpreters. When we ask questions and you have these around your necks, you actually have to put them like this, because otherwise they can't hear the question. I'm just informing the members when you ask the question and you use these. So when you ask the question, just put it on the side and then everything will be perfect. Now we'll continue with a follow-up. Did you understand? Yeah. Yes, yeah, they have a problem hearing when we have it too close and we ask the question and we have it here. So we need to put it here when you ask the question. Okay? Merci. Follow up? Ivan? No, ask the question. I understood this should happen.
On veut le faire mettre sans le casque. D'accord. Sans le casque. Là, je suis complètement perdu.
I'm slightly lost now, to be honest. So, another question. The fact that the European Union spends as much, so much in Africa is not really appreciated. There's a document on Christie's group that says that China gives $1 million and has a press release from the African Union that the European Union spends 20 times that and is criticised. Just say in politics we need to do work, but we need to make sure people know what we are doing as well. We seem to have lost the most important battle, that of public opinion in this area.
Commissioner designate.
I personally don't see that we have lost anything. I think that EU is the greatest or the biggest donor in the world. I think 2018 we used, as the EU, we used 14 billion euros for developing cooperation, and totally, together with the member states, we used over 70 billion euros for developing cooperation. It's a huge amount of money, but unfortunately we need more because challenges are so big. And that's why I mentioned the role of the private sector, because I see that we need to invest more in Africa and we need to have private sector to be part of that approach. What comes to the role of Africa, I see that future of Africa is future of Europe. These two continents are connected to each other. So, of course, I would like to change the narrative, as I mentioned already in my speech. There is 1.2 billion people living in Africa, and over half of them are under 25 years old. So it's a continent of opportunities, and of course we need to support that positive narrative.
Now I would like to give the floor to Resort Sarnecki from ECR.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Prime Minister, I'm here. Madam Commissioner, designated Commissioner, before your answer after my question, I tell you kitos in your language. Thank you. But before it, I have one important question on behalf of my political group. I speak in Polish. Please respect the principle of languages in our parliament. Przez lata byłem członkiem Zgromadzenia Parlamentarnego.
I've been a member of the Parliamentary Assembly, EU, ACP, and now these partnership agreements between EU countries and ACP countries are very much advanced. However, recently our parliament voiced some fears, some concerns that this negotiation process is slower than expected because we have some kind of skepticism on the part of our ACP partners. And we addressed the European Commission to give the new dynamics to this process. What do you think about this?
Commissioner designate.
I think it's very important to achieve post-Cotonou agreement or finalize the negotiations on post-Cotonou agreement. As I mentioned earlier today, I see that African, but also Latin American and Caribbean countries and Asian countries are, of course, very important partners for us. So, of course, if I be nominated as commissioner, and I start my work 1st of November, hopefully. This will be the priority on my agenda, to try to finalize post-Cotonou negotiations, of course, with the support of the Parliament and other European institutions.
Follow-up?
Kiitos. Thank you.
Then we continue with the next. I give the floor now to Hildegard Bentele, EPP.
Ein Teil des Ausschusses hat.
Well, last week, some of the committee had the opportunity to be in New York, and we felt the great expectations that are on the EU to continue to push our values and move forward with sustainable development. And so I think we need visibility and coherence, not so much internally in the Commission, but also in the work with Member States. There's a whole range of work that's being done by Member States, a lot of money that goes to NGOs. And here comes my question then. What are you going to do to ensure there's programming so that we can work on the same focus areas with different countries, so that we have more coherence in the development work that we do, and in that way the EU's work will be better perceived and will bear more fruit?
Commissioner designate.
I think that's very important perspective, because without policy coherence, we are not able to achieve sustainable development goals. So as I mentioned earlier, I see that Agenda 2030, it's a kind of compass. And it's a framework through which we should see and analyze all the policy work we are doing in different spectrum. And of course, we are not able to do it only by the European institutions. We need to have member states to be part of that process. And as you mentioned, joint planning, joint programming, and then also joint follow-up, so that we are able to see the results and achievements, it's important tool to be used. I think that member states, they have done different kind of strategies regarding to the sustainable development goals. I know the one which Finland has used. So I think that could be something that we could try to share those examples that, you know, what different member states have been using, and also try to think that if there is something we could to take to be used. But I think you are correct. Without policy coherence, including agriculture, trade, of course, external relations, we are not able to achieve sustainable development goals. It's the key.
Follow up.
Programming. Dann eine Frage zum Thema.
Well, a question on budgetary assistance. This is a tool which is often used because it's quick, but there's perhaps a lack of accountability, and also it's not very targeted. So how are you going to be dealing with that particular tool in the future?
Commissioner designate.
I see that budget support will be the one tool in the package, also in the future. But I fully agree with you that when we are using budget support, it's important that we have a very, very strong transparency. And we also can follow up what the member states or our partner states in this regard are doing with the budget support. And if there is any kind of corruption or something like that, we need to stop the financing and then, you know, monitor what has happened. But I also know that through the budget support we have achieved quite good results. So I think that also in the future it will be one of the tools. Not the only one, but one of the tools in the package.
Catherine Chabot, Renew.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And thank you, Commissioner Designate. I'd like to welcome you here as well. In 2002, President Jacques Chirac declared at the Earth Summit that our house was on fire and we're looking the other way. But after the dramatic diagnosis that was established by climate experts last week, we can say the same now of the oceans, which play such an important role for regulating the climate. Now, temperatures are going up, there is acidification, there is not enough oxygen, and it's overwhelmed with pollutants and plastics, and you know that in the Baltic this is a major problem. So the consequences have already been a disaster, and we're going to see even worse news for the whole of humanity, and in particular for communities and territories that are on islands and coastal areas and developing countries. They are the most exposed and most vulnerable to the consequences of these changes. So do you not think then that there is a major subject to deal with here for the European Union? First, we are the biggest maritime area in the world and we're the biggest public donor for development. So that means we should now be mobilizing international partners as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Designate.
I fully agree that oceans are essential. And not only because I have lived on the coast nearly all my life. And sea has been a very important part of my life, and especially when I was young. So I think you are right. Oceans provide food and nutrition security, but also economic growth and jobs. But at the same time, we need to be aware that marine ecosystems are under threat, and unfortunately impacts they have worsened by climate change. So I know that the European Union is supporting oceans, and development amounts is something like 720 million euros, so quite a lot, but definitely this will be very close to my heart in the future.
Follow up?
Yes, let me be clear. Obviously, it's important to restore marine and coastal ecosystems, but at the same time, we have to help those people living in these areas to cope with the changes. In 2050, 80% or more of people will be living in coastal regions. So these people also have to be able to cope with an ocean. We need to have preservation systems, healthy seas, because that's important for the coastal areas, for people who need to eat, and we also need to think about developing renewable energy. So I think this is a very important subject. Development invests a great deal on continents, but perhaps we're not doing enough on the coasts, for the coasts, and in our oceans in particular. Thank you.
Commissioner Designate.
As I said, I think the financial support to oceans and development is something like 720 million euros. Of course, we can discuss whether it's enough or not. Maybe it's not. But I see that oceans and fisheries should be part of the Green Deal. So as I said earlier today, when I was answering to Mrs. Rivasi's question, I said that it's not enough to have this internal dimension in the Green Deal. We also should have external dimension in the Green Deal. And of course, oceans and fisheries should be part of that external dimension. And somehow I feel that there is a broad support for that idea that environment broadly and climate will be one of those priorities in the coming years regarding the work of the future college.
Now I give the floor to Louise Stedman-Bryce, non-attached.
Commissioner Designate, your portfolio talks about building sustainable partnerships, yet look at how poorly your predecessors have treated the United Kingdom during the Brexit negotiations. How do you expect to build sustainable partnerships when your approach seems to be to bully until your model is accepted? It's clear now that the British public want a clean break Brexit with a simple trading partnership. This is also clearly in the best interest now for both parties. So my first question is, will you commit to repairing the damage that was caused by the previous Commission? And my second question is, will you commit to changing the EU's approach to the UK and seeking a simple, mutual, beneficial trade-based relationship so we can have a sustainable partnership that your role will facilitate?
Commissioner designate.
Sorry, micro. I have to say that Brexit was not our decision or our choice. Like Mr. Barnier and Mr. Juncker have said in the past, I regret it, but I respect it. So if confirmed and provided Brexit has not taken place by then, I will continue work towards an orderly withdrawal of the UK from the EU. And at this point, we don't know whether we can agree with the UK on its orderly withdrawal. So it would therefore not be appropriate for me to speculate now on the future development cooperation. But as I mentioned already to Madame Bilde, I respect the work the UK is doing regarding development cooperation, and I hope that we can be partners in any case in the future.
Follow-up?
Surely the people of the UK deserve some sort of response to that.
Commissioner designate.
I think we will see that answer and the outcome in the future.
Then we continue with the next question. It's Carlos Zorino from S&D.
Signora Commissaria. Commissioner designate, welcome. In your letter, your mission letter, you asked to draw up a new holistic strategy for Africa with the High Representative. This is already ongoing. There's negotiations with the post-Cotonou ACP. In your letter of mission highlights the political, economic and investment opportunities. However, it doesn't set out issues around sustainability. Sustainability, green growth, corporate social responsibility, all absolutely vital. We cannot eliminate abject poverty if we only look at economic and investment issues. So that's why I wanted to ask you, how do you think you will work with the High Representatives to focus on sustainability goals in the partnership with Africa? And how do you think you'll work in the area of conflict minerals? And how can you guarantee that investors meet their commitments in relation to human rights, workers' rights and environmental rights in Africa? Thank you.
I think your question is essential because for me, sustainable development is social, environmental, and economically sustainable development. So that's the way I understand sustainable development. So all these aspects, social, environmental, and economical, need to be present, need to be part of that development. And as I said, the framework for our cooperation, and I think that my fellow colleague, High Representative Vice President Borrell, can also share this idea. The framework is Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the program I'm committed That's the program the whole college is committed to. And now we need to take care of the implementation. That's the main thing. And I got your greetings from the last week meeting in New York, and I understand that we need to do more. Otherwise, we are not able to achieve Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. So my personal view is that Africa strategy, comprehensive strategy for Africa, is one tool for that. It's one tool to have partnership with Africa, but also to achieve Sustainable Development Goals. It should be a comprehensive strategy so that different policy sectors are part of that approach. It needs to be trade, needs to be present, agriculture, environment, and so on. And this is something I start to prepare together with the High Representative, Vice President Borrell, but I want to stress the importance of the commitment of the whole college. It can't be my process, it can't be our process, it needs to be the process of the whole college.
Follow-up?
Thank you for your very clear response. As you know, a vital part of the EU-ACP partnership is dialogue at all levels, including interparliamentary dialogue. Furthermore, as part of the ACP Cotonou Agreement, there is a joint parliamentary assembly between the ACP and EU, and this guarantees dialogue between the two parliaments, but also supervision of projects. We want to see the ACP may remain as one single bloc, and the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly has already set out the fact that we want there to be a similar interparliamentary delegation in the new post-Cotonou agreement. How will you defend this position in negotiations with heads of state in the EU to ensure the continuity of the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly? Thank you. Will you support that?
As I said, to being parliamentarian over 16 years, I really respect the work you are doing in the parliament. And I also see that in the future ACP cooperation, the parliamentary dimension has to be present. It has to be part of that cooperation. I know that in the current plans, there is this kind of idea that we should have 3 regional assemblies in the future. So not only one, but instead of one, we should have like 3 regional assemblies. I think that what is the most important thing for me is to take care that somehow, I don't know, is it the one way or another way, the parliamentary dimension will be present. And of course, this is something we will definitely discuss about if I start my work as a commissioner in the beginning of November. It will be one of my priorities, and I tend to participate the Parliamentary Assembly in November in Rwanda, I think it is.
Eva Kopacz, EPP.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you and welcome to our committee, and thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions. What about the hitherto level of financing for humanitarian aid and development for Africa, for Caribbean, and for Pacific? Will it be maintained in the future multi-annual financial framework until 2027? And will NGOs that cooperate with the Commission and which perform the projects can have the full guarantee that they will have access to the full finance? Thank you.
Commissioner designate.
I know that Finnish presidency is working hard for the MFF, and of course we all are following very closely what is going to happen in that regard. I mean, because our financing for developing cooperation, financing for humanitarian aid is, of course, dependent on the MFF. So what happens there, it affects and has influence to our financing as well. But of course, I can say personally that I am very happy that the Commission proposal includes increasing of financing for the development cooperation. So I see that we should have more resources for international cooperation, including development cooperation. And what I said about NGOs and civil society organizations, you probably know that I have my background in NGOs. I have worked, for instance, in World Vision in Finland. So I definitely see their role as a very important partner for us, and I want to cooperate together with them in the future.
Follow-up?
Bardzo krótko.
Very briefly, I would like to know, how do you evaluate the impact of Brexit? What will be the impact of Brexit on trade, on international cooperation between Europe, Africa, Pacific countries, and Caribbean countries? What is your opinion on the impact of Brexit, potential impact of Brexit?
Commissioner designate.
I understand that we are all very interested in Brexit. And we would like to know what will happen in the end of October. But unfortunately, I feel that it's not my place to speculate with this subject. So we might come back to this issue then later on.
Now I would like to give the floor to Manan Aubry, GUE.
Bonjour. Good morning. I'm just over here. I wanted to touch on a subject that hasn't really been addressed, I'm surprised to say, by this committee to date. It's constantly in the headlines. Just this week, the day before yesterday, 9 Sudanese filed a complaint against a big French bank, BNP Paribas, for having financed crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity carried out by Bashir in Sudan. And there isn't a European legal framework for this, so for decades now, human rights violations by companies haven't been subject to remedy, and there seems to be a total climate of impunity. The European Union, nevertheless, is very active in promoting private actors in these countries, pushing private-public investment, and there is also an increasing number of free trade agreements, and there isn't this legal framework. So if we want to have proper partnerships with private companies in developing countries, we have to make sure that European companies are responsible for the human rights violations they commit. So my question then is, the Netherlands, France, and perhaps even Germany now have a due diligence law, and that is applied to international companies working in the international sphere. Also, DG Justice has come up with a similar initiative. So would you be in favour of this kind of thing for companies operating in the European Union and subject them to this kind of scrutiny if they're working in developing countries?
Commissioner designate.
As I said earlier today, I think it was my answer to Mr. Urban Crespo, that we build development for the people. That's the key. We do it for people, not for companies or for governments. And of course, in everything we do, we must ensure that we don't cause more pain to the most vulnerable people by, for instance, cutting aid due to the problems in local governance or societies. But in a way, I see that it's a kind of win-win situation, which we should aim to, because, for instance, promoting a global level playing field for EU companies operating worldwide means supporting also European jobs. So my understanding is actually today that Commission promotes the implementation of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. That's the position of our Commission. And personally, I see that that's the right position, because all the work we do, we need to respect the human rights. And that's my commitment.
Follow up within 1 minute.
Well, I'm sure you know that the difference between the UN guiding principles and the request brought by countless NGOs for years now and brought by civil society is the issue of the mandatory nature of this. All of the voluntary principles and so on, they're not helping enough for human rights victims, particularly in developing countries where there is a weak rule of law system. People aren't brought to account. So this answer, which is about pointing to and supporting UN guiding principles, is not enough in our view. It's not enough to deal with the expectations of NGOs that have been driving this question for years now. So my follow-up question is then, between now and the next few weeks, there are going to be negotiations with the UN on an international treaty. So we're going from the European level to an international level. So the ideal, I think, would be for the European Union to have a binding legal framework on human rights for this. And I know that when it comes to human rights in companies, that the Commission is coming up with a text and they're analysing that text. But what's the conclusion of that? And are you going to have a clear negotiating and proactive negotiating mandate for the European Union in our upcoming negotiations?
How I have understand the situation is that it's a mandate of the current Commission, because the meeting will be held in October. But the information I got, because we had a very nice discussion about this, is that the Commission is going to participate in that meeting in Geneva in October. I agree with you that we need obligations, and I promise you that I will study very closely this subject when I start my work as a commissioner.
Now I give the floor to Jackie Jones, S&D.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm over here. And Madame Urpilainen, I hope I said that right. First of all, I'd like to thank you for acknowledging UK NGOs' work on the ground, and I would like to acknowledge the work of UK NGOs on the ground in the UK who are fighting very hard, campaigning to remain, and there's a growing sphere for that. Now, the question that I was going to ask has already been highlighted. That's one of the things about coming last, I think, or coming towards the end of the list. So I welcome your commitment for women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, and fully committed to that, as well as abortion services and health services. I also welcome your commitment to the Spotlight Initiative and the EU Gender Action Plan. I'm absolutely delighted to hear that that will go forward. What my question would be is about financing and gender budgeting, making sure that it's adequately funded for a lengthy time, and making sure the civil partnerships are involved at every level. Thank you.
Commissioner designate.
Thank you. And maybe one aspect I would like to add is the political participation of women. And I think that we as politicians, we are in a way examples for the partner countries, that we need to get more women to be part of the politics, because if we have more women as politicians, I'm sure that in a way we are able to provide gender equality, although in the different policy areas. What comes to the financing, I am very happy that in the future Commission there is a Commissioner for Gender Equality. And I'm definitely looking forward to having close cooperation with her. And I think that this is a subject where we can together try to provide so that in every policy area the Commission is working with, the gender aspect is more strongly present. And of course that includes also financing, that we could be able to have that perspective in our budget, the common budget in the future. I'm very delighted about that idea.
Follow up?
Thank you. That's reassuring to hear, but a commitment to adequately funding all of those initiatives would be even better, I would suggest. And also, of course, in the comprehensive strategy for Africa and further afield as well, because without adequate funding, it would be very difficult for NGOs in particular, because of austerity measures that have occurred for the last 10 years. They have been stripped of their funding across the board, across the world. And as we know, in order to fulfill our commitments for the Agenda 2030, it's about leaving no one behind. And in order to enable that to be done, especially for women and girls who are subject to violence wherever they go, it's really key to have adequate financing, financial as well as personnel. So please consider that, and it's really crucial in order to fulfill our commitments for the Spotlight Initiative as well, and our commitment to end violence against women and girls throughout the world.
Commissioner designate.
As I said, gender equality is a key priority for me. So, of course, I try to look for more resources for that as well. And I fully agree with you that gender equality, we need to mainstream that. We have to remind that gender equality is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have all committed ourselves to those goals. So also from that perspective, I see that if we want to improve the living conditions and political party or any kind of participation of women, we need to have this kind of holistic approach, and I'm ready to work with that.
Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Ellie Chose, Greens.
Thank you. Here. Hi. Thank you. And yes, as a British MEP who believes that the EU is an excellent example of strong international partnership for the public good, I can only apologise for the action of a small minority of Brits who use opportunities like this for rather inept political grandstanding rather than engaging in the substance of this committee. I have a question on substance. It's on pollution and health, which is an issue that I think addresses those triple dimensions of sustainable development: environmental, social and economic. So President von der Leyen has made a Green Deal one of her top priorities, as you've said, and she's included a zero pollution ambition within it. But although I'm glad to see that you have talked about the external dimension of the Green Deal, that's not, it hasn't appeared, on paper so far and in the other discussions. And I find this really rather surprising, given that the authoritative Lancet report in 2017 and recent work by the World Health Organization shows that pollution is the largest environmental cause of disease and death worldwide. This particularly affects people in low and middle income countries. It kills 3 times as many people as AIDS, TB and malaria in low and middle income countries. And yet, tackling pollution receives relatively little development assistance, even from Europe, which we would expect should be a global leader in giving cost-effective assistance that addresses the needs of the poorest. Pollution is also a transboundary issue. Food and products produced in low-income countries come over here as well. So, how will you ensure you're fully part of the zero pollution team and integrate that closely with tackling poverty?
Commissioner designate.
Thank you for this important question. As you personally said, pollution is the largest environmental cause of disease and death in the world today. And unfortunately, nearly 90% of these deaths happen in low and middle income countries. I definitely see that this aspect should be part of the Green Deal package. And as I have said many times in this hearing, I hope that you as a parliament would support us so that we should have this kind of external dimension in the Green Deal. I think if you agree on that, I think it would be a good idea to also show your support to that idea. Because I think that through the Green Deal, we could be able to, or we can be able to support clean and sustainable energy, for instance, in our partner countries. We can be able to support circular economy transition, for instance. So that, in a way, that Green Deal gives many opportunities for us. And of course, what comes to the finances, I see that NDICI, it's a good tool for that because, you know, we have committed with NDICI to give at least 20% or even more finances to the climate and environmental programs. So I think it's also a very strong commitment.
Follow up?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that response. You've talked about how your title reflects understanding that we need to move away from these old binaries of developed and developing, although I noticed that many of us seem to find it hard to do that in reality. And I would argue that the way we measure development itself is very old-fashioned. It hasn't changed for decades, GNI per capita, GDP growth. And such a narrow focus on these flawed economic measures gives us a very narrow picture of poverty and development. So I'd like to ask you, do you agree that what gets measured gets managed? And therefore, how should we change the way that we measure development to take account of and better reflect the fact that development is multidimensional, social, environmental and economic? What changes would you like to see and what actions will you take in your term of office to push this forward?
Commissioner designate.
I personally see that if we want to achieve sustainable development goals, which I think we all want to achieve, so we need to have this kind of holistic approach. So we can't think that, this is the development policy that EU is doing, this is the trade policy that EU is doing, this is the agriculture policy that EU is doing, so that, we just look at, the old silos, but not the holistic approach. So if we want to really achieve sustainable development, which is economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable, we need to have a holistic approach. And I think this is something what we really try to do with this comprehensive strategy for Africa. So that all the Commission, whole college is part of that preparation. So that all my colleagues, not only me and Mr. Borrell, will be preparing that strategy, but also Commissioner for Trade, Commissioner for Agriculture will be part of that present. I think that this is, in a way, the different kind of, this is a new approach, at least from my perspective, and I'm very committed to at least try to get also better results through that kind of approach.
Now I give the floor to Martin Horwood, Renew.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'm not, you'll be relieved to know, going to ask you about Brexit, but I, for one, look forward to being here for the full 5-year mandate, working with you to tackle important issues like how to help the world's poor. I can't think of many more important things. I'm going to ask you about transparency, which you mentioned in your opening remarks. The Commission is committed to increased aid transparency and to meeting the International Aid Transparency Initiative standard, the IATI standard in particular. This won't just enable citizens to know where their money is spent, as you said, but it will also help to reduce corruption and inefficiency, and it will help to defend the whole idea of vital European aid against its critics and detractors and those who think it is a waste of money. How will you, as Commissioner, though, help to promote transparency in general and the IATI standard in particular, not just within Europe, but across the world amongst other development actors as well?
Commissioner designated.
This is very important value to me, because as a former finance minister, I know that always when you use taxpayers' money, you need to be very careful, and you need to be ready to defend always the way you have used people's money. So of course, from that perspective, I think that we need to improve the transparency. Unfortunately, I don't have yet concrete new initiatives to give you, but if you have some ideas how to improve transparency, I'm definitely willing to listen to you. But I think I'm very committed to improve the transparency in everything we do, our programming, our common projects and everything. Because, as I said earlier, it's important to be able to explain to people how are we using the money, what are achievements, what are the results, and of course also to be able to show that we are efficient. That's also important. So I have to say that now I have been sitting together with my DG 2 weeks. I really respect their knowledge, their commitment, and also their efficiency. I'm looking really a lot to have this opportunity to work together with them, but still I believe that there is always room for improvement. So please, if you have some ideas, I'm very happy to listen to you.
Follow-up?
I do have one idea. It's obviously very important to hear your very welcome commitment to transparency. And it's one of the advantages of 28 countries working together that we can use the weight and force of the European Union in international forums to promote transparency and the IATI standard in particular, the International Aid Transparency Initiative standard. But only half our own member states meet that IATI standard. So it is difficult for us to tell other people around the world to meet the higher standards in transparency if only half our own member states do that. So will you work to ensure in your 5-year term that all European member states meet the IATI standard at the very least, and therefore give us a better platform on which to promote transparency in aid spending worldwide?
Commissioner designate.
I'm so experienced politician that I'm very careful with the promises. I only promise what I can definitely keep, but I promise to do my best. And as I said earlier, for me it's a question of legitimacy of the European Union. So we need to be able to show the people the results we have achieved. That's the way also to strengthen the legitimacy of the European Union. So I try my best.
I'll give the floor to Frances Fitzgerald.
Designated, I'm delighted to hear your commitment to gender issues today and indeed the focus it's got at the committee here today. We know that Europe and the world will not reach the 2030 agenda goals and particularly climate goals without significant financial investment. Experience from the small island developing states is showing us that the private sector can play a significant role building climate resilience in economic development and in post-disaster recovery as well. And how can the European Union support, focus most effectively on the vulnerable and leveraging the support of others, particularly in the private sector as well as the public, of course building in appropriate standards, to effectively support both development and climate solutions, especially related to clean energy transitions?
Commissioner designate.
I think it was important what you said about least development countries, and of course that will be our priority. We need to support those countries which are least developed countries. But at the same time, I want to raise another aspect, because we know that more and more countries are middle-income countries, which is, of course, good because we can see the development they have or improvement they have done. And unfortunately, in many middle-income countries, inequality is very high. So, from that perspective, my personal commitment will be to fight against inequalities, because I think this is a huge challenge. Not only the middle-income countries, but also in every, almost in every European Union member states. So this will be the guiding principles for me, that we are able to fight against inequality in different kind of with different kind of tools. What comes to the role of the private sector, I fully agree with you that we need to have private sector involved, and we already have different kind of measures for that. We have, of course, blending. We have other tools as well, and I think that in the future we need to have multiple equipments in a way that so we have different kind of tools to be able to use. But without the participation of private sector, we are not able to achieve sustainable development goals. I think it's quite honest to say that. And of course, from that perspective, it's necessary to have a strong commitment also from the private sector that this is a common approach and they will be part of our partnership.
Follow up?
Of course, I agree with you about fighting inequalities and using every tool available to us. But clearly climate change, if it's not handled properly and we don't deal with the challenges, is going to lead to even greater inequality. So a specific question, the UN has said it's very disappointed on the whole question of the funding that's currently available for the Sustainable Development Goals. So what would you do in particular to develop cooperation and synergies between the public and the private sector? As I said already, building in very clear human rights standards. But the level of investment right now is very, very low.
Commissioner designate.
I fully agree with you regarding climate change. And I think this we have been talking about a lot about Green Deal, and I think it's one of the examples of the commitment of a future college relating to climate change. And I also I see that the alliance initiative made by President Juncker, it was a good start. How to get more private investments to the, for instance, to Africa. So we don't need to begin from the beginning. we have good examples. We have already achieved good results. So my duty, of course, is try to look for new initiatives, how to get more private investments to Africa, for instance. And I'm ready, of course, to do that.
Thank you, and thank you all members. Yes, it's over. No, we have a couple of minutes. Wait. I would like to thank the members for all the questions. Of course, I would also like to thank the Commissioner designate for your answer. I would also like to thank you for the length of the answer. I think we saw some Finnish efficiency there. We actually have a lot of time left, but the rules are very clear. There's only 25 questions. But I would like to say to the Commissioner designated that if you are confirmed that we do look forward to the statements that you have done, to the commitment of working very close to the European Parliament. The coordinators know that we will have an evaluation meeting, and you will have the details about that. That meeting will be behind closed doors. I would lastly also would like to invite the Commissioner designate if you want to say some closing words before we end this public hearing. So please.
Thank you. Because I haven't used my own language in this hearing, so I really hope that it's okay for you that I will say a few words in my own language, Finnish. Kiitos.
Chairman, dear members of the European Parliament, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks for this debate. As I have repeatedly mentioned during this hearing, the European Parliament is an important place for me. I believe in representative democracy, and I need the support of the European peoples through you in my future job. A sustainable future is only possible if the European institutions cooperate. I would also like to thank you for challenging me into going into the substance, and the weight of this debate is a reflection of the importance of this field. It would be a great honor to build these partnerships in cooperation with you. In my opinion, this discussion shows the appreciation and the weight of development policy in Europe. This portfolio is indeed in the focus when the European Parliament leaves its footprint in the lives of millions of people all over the world. I think that this renamed portfolio is at the heart of the European Commission. And I think international partnerships as a term reflects our valuable tradition in development cooperation, but also something more. It reflects our opportunities to really have our say and have an impact in the development of the world as equal partners with our partner countries. Eradication of poverty is at the center of our work. We must stop poverty in all its forms, everywhere. There's a lot of work because still 78 million people, according to the UN, live below the poverty line. This is also my compass if I am given the honor to work as a commissioner. We will have to continue our cooperation to reach the 0.7% target in development aid. We must have genuine partnerships between equal partners. We cannot unilaterally help others. We need to meet global challenges together. It means that we need to have an improved dialogue with our partners. The objectives of sustainable development pave the way for modern thinking. These 17 goals give us a way, and we only need to compare this with traditional development aid. It shows that we need more money. So we need greater resources for development cooperation. We need to have the NGOs and private companies working with us. At the same time, we must make sure that corporate responsibility and our values are taken into account, but we mustn't forget that investments create jobs for those who don't have them. I am sure that these global partnerships will make it possible for me to concentrate on reaching the sustainable development goals and eradication inequalities and combating poverty. And this is the future we want to build. This is our objective in our global sustainable development work. Dear friends, I am an optimist. I agree with Mahatma Gandhi when he says that the humankind is like an ocean. There can be dirty drops in the ocean. It does not make the ocean dirty. I believe that that people are good and that they will be able to make the world better for the future generations. And I finish by saying that I am proud of us and Europe. Our debate once more shows that by working together, the European Union makes itself an important global actor, and we must maintain things this way in the future. Thank you very much.
And on that note, we end this public hearing.